We come to the 24th presentation in this year, and during each of these year-long series of presentations, 52, you get something that's 4 times the size of the prize 13-part television series like Civilization, The Ascent of Man, Cosmos, the New Cosmos series, and the program that I worked on for almost half a century, The Learning Civilization, is 2 full years. And not just 45, 50-minute programs, but 90-minute programs, more or less. So that the Learning Civilization program that is now ready on NISA's incredible app is 4 times the size of those 4 series put together. Civilization by Kenneth Clark, Lord Clark as he often preferred to be addressed. That 13-part series ran a total of 640 minutes and was a colossal, epic release when it came out in 1969. The Learning Civilization is 9,360 minutes long. We're coming in this presentation to put a little perspective on the scalar of what is being done here and why it is that since the giving of the Learning Civilization double year in 2006 and 2007, starting in 2008, the last 6 years have been an exercise in pushing forward and outward, upwards and onwards, as my friend Theodore Sturgeon used to have as his motto, that this is expandable in this scalar to something truly amazing and astounding. Among the things that we're going to take a look at today are a couple of incredible women whose work in the 20th century and into the 21st century was seminal in what it is that we're exploring. But as a sort of a appetizer, a prelude, I want to come to this volume. It originally was a paperback copy, my copy of the great novel by Hermann Hesse called The Glass Bead Game, in German Das Glasperlenspiel. And it was bound by a young Japanese student of mine in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. She was taking a bookbinding class, and she said, "Do you have something favorite that I could bind for you?" And so I chose it, and this is her wonderful job of binding. It's interesting because Das Glasperlenspiel, the glass bead game, was a monumental book that when it was published first in its entirety in a 2-volume set in 1945, it literally dwarfed a lot of competition by world-class items that came out in 1945. And he was the next year in 1946 awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. Building up to the glass bead game, which is so epical, coming out coinciding with the detonation of the atomic bomb, which was so devastatingly ripping the entire fabric of mankind's heritage. One of the most poignant figures of the day, writing just even still in exile in the Gobi Desert of China, having been exiled there for almost 40 years by the Roman Catholic Church, was Teilhard de Chardin, who had given a mass to a couple of British soldiers in a foxhole in World War I. And they asked for a mass, and he said, I have nothing to offer for the mass. And then he had the insight that he would offer the entire world. And for this, when the report got to the papal censors, they exiled him to the Gobi Desert to become a paleontologist and to deal with rocks and fossils for the rest of his life so that no one would hear him. In 1945, he wrote an incredible short essay, Spiritual Repercussions of the Atomic Bomb. And as an echo to that, A.E. Van Vogt published, even in the month, August 1945, the beginning of his great novel, The World of Null A, the world of non-Aristotelian thought, in the then very famous science fiction magazine, Astounding Science Fiction. It was Hesse who prepared from World War I to the conclusion of World War II the experience of a German language visionary to try, from his Swiss residence of being safe in Switzerland, yet being German speaking and being touted as being one of the most famous and creative of all the authors in the German language in that part of the 20th century, that he went to India to try to season himself to a broader quality of humanity, and decided to take as a theme person for a short novel which he wrote and which sold like crazy. I think it was 1921, called Siddhartha, which is the personal name of the Buddha, the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. Then he realized that that was only half of what humanity had experienced, and that World War I had brought rushing back to the surface, that there was a whole other way, other than the calm analytic of the Buddha. There was the ferocious cascade swirling maelstrom. And so he wrote to go as the pair, the symmetry, the exact opposite of Siddhartha, Steppenwolf, about someone who is alienated from everything, including himself, who in his wanderings in Steppenwolf comes to a desolate, lonely, macabre, surreal alleyway, and there is a sign of a theater with performances with the warning, "For madmen only." Then, having written Steppenwolf and Siddhartha as this clashing pair, both of them read by millions at the time, he decided to put the two of them in some sort of equilibrium that could be dealt with, and he wrote a third called Narcissus and Gulben. But it was not satisfactory at all, because it was like a dead even limbo that doesn't go anywhere. And that's when the theme of the glass bead game rushed up into his creative milieu. In the foreword to the English translation done by Mervyn Seville, whose translation I had in the large paperback edition. Finally, we arrive by a logical progression at Hesse's most substantial work, Das Glasperlenspiel, that superb philosophical romance, which, ably translated by my friend, Mervyn Seville, it is my pleasure and privilege to introduce to English-speaking readers. This book, first published in its entirety in 1945, represents an attempt on the author's part to formulate an ideal design for living. Whilst he indulges in neither the Gallic fantastification nor the macabre inventions, Hesse takes us, as some have done in shorter tales, into a future where a very different order of society from our own obtains. You talk about a new world order? This was it, at the birth of the atomic bomb. He invents and describes in fascinating detail an aristocratic hierarchy of intellectuals who form the so-called Castilian order, in which is incorporated the faculty of the Glasperlenspieler, a beautiful German word, the full quality of which the literal English translation, bead players, fails to convey. Members of the order must seek to coordinate all the arts and sciences into a whole which transcends the sum of the constituent parts. Something akin to what Robert Bridges, I presume, had in mind when in The Testament of Beauty he wrote, "The accord of sense, instinct, reason, and spirit. For those who attain to proficiency in the Glasperlenspiel is raised to the level of a mystic rite, in which acutest mental awareness is coupled with a yoga-like discipline of meditation. Music, in particular the pure music of Bach, and mathematics are the foundations, stones upon which the whole complicated structure is erected. The book is a tour de force in which vision is offset by meticulous analysis, fantasy balanced by sound argument, yet here the antinomy between Siddhartha and Steppenwolf is not resolved. It is brought to a boiling over point. And it takes the course of this epic novel to disclose through the literary experience of the readers, of which at that time the world was tuned to receive something that one could understand what has happened. The most famous phrase from Oppenheimer, Robert J. Oppenheimer, as the first atomic bomb in the test site at Trinity site in northern New Mexico went off, he quoted from a translation of the Bhagavad Gita that the destroyer of worlds has come, is set loose. A genie of immense power, which, to keep it from being evil, is going to take everything that is possible, because it cannot be put back in the bottle. While Hesse was getting his derivation of insight from India, beginning with Siddhartha, Many other German language persons of that ilk, of that level, were looking at the sudden realization that civilization had been torn up. It wasn't just that it had been trampled on and discarded in the First World War, or that it had been nightmarish in the Second World War, but that the conclusion of the Second World War was an impossibility for civilization to continue. It would never be the same again. You cannot put the genie back in the bottle. One of the responses to this, on the political level, on the international level, was to revive the League of Nations idea of Woodrow Wilson that he proposed during the First World War. Let's bring it back and refurbish it. Let's make the United Nations. And in San Francisco, this idea was finally seen that we are at a juncture. We have crossed a threshold. We cannot go back. We cannot continue in this way. Something new on this scalar must be done, and now, and in a hurry. One of the great German language geniuses at the time was Heinrich Zimmer, whose father was a famous scholar, and Zimmer looked to India to be a balancing resource for the European emphasis on itself, both in excellence and arrogance, and published eventually a number of books on India. In fact, he was so influential that another German-speaking Swiss, Carl Jung, who received incredible funding from Andrew and Mary Mellon, the funds to make a whole series of books that would come out. It was structured so that the first volume came out in 1943. It was called the Bollingen series, named for Carl Jung's tower home, Bollingen, on Lake Zurich, outside of Zurich, Switzerland. And Heinrich Zimmer's books were all published in the Bollingen series. The first one was a collection of wisdom, insights into civilization and its problems. And among them were wisdom tales. One of them was Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. One of them was on an ancient India wisdom little work, in translation in English, called The King and the Corpse. And it was so influential that another contemporary of Hermann Hesse, Thomas Mann, on the level of Hesse, Nobel Prize winner in 1927 for The Magic Mountain, wrote a short little novel on the way in which two heads have to be exchanged in order for there to be a resolution to something that is so nightmarish that it cannot be forgotten, it cannot be righted, it cannot be dealt with. It can only be resolved, as the word is expanded to a solution that is expanded to an alchemy that is lifted to a spiritual, high conscious level. The tale is about a young prince in a cemetery where all of the ghastly things are happening. Not just the burying of the dead, but the burning of bodies, the corroding of bodies, and the death of everyone. And there's this magician who draws a circle and says, I can help you if you will do this simple task. There is a corpse. That's why it's called The King and the Corpse, because the young prince is just about to become the king. If you will cut down that corpse and bring it here and place it in my circle before me, I will be able to show you the way out. And each time as he does and cuts the corpse down, and the young king comes towards the magician and he puts it down, the magician says, now, if you are unable to answer my question to you, your head will explode and you will die instantly with your brains blasted here and now. And the young king steels himself, which is a mild word to say what he did, and refuses to answer. Immediately the corpse goes back, hanging on the tree. And again the magician says, you must cut him down and bring the corpse here and dump it into my circle, and then I will reveal to you. And this happens several times until finally the young king refuses to accept the question, refuses to entertain the riddle. And in a poof of vapor, the magician vanishes, and the quiet of a cemetery shows the actual situation. The Tale of the Two Heads by Thomas Mann, the essay by Heinrich Zimmer, who's one of his great books. I read it when I was 19, Six Philosophies of India, and Hermann Hesse. All of this, just in the German language, just in the space of a couple of decades, is the proofing of the fact that we are now, by 2014, deeper into the 21st century. The situation is exacerbated not only 1,000-fold, but 1 trillion-fold. So what we are doing here in 2014, June, almost to the next presentation, 25, will be on the summer solstice, one of the great holidays of the world, especially in civilization. Been a special festival day for me for many, many decades. Our situation is such that all of what has been tendered as the situation is erroneous and corrupted. The insolubility, the impossibility of the situation, the nightmarishness, the surreality of our condition is due to a massive, entrenched, long-promoted confusion and corruption that especially has been the infection of civilization since it became formalized about 4350 BC, 6,350 years ago, 64 years ago, by the establishment of a written language, taking the written form of expressing what only had been oral understanding of life, speech, the speaking, the ability to speak and have wisdom, have society, have life on all levels, not just as individuals. Usually in oral cultures, individuality would be an abstract thing. It's the participation with those around you, friends, family, generations, ancestors, descendants, spirits, the whole thing. The experience of being able to write a discursive language, to make that transform out of speech, is a very peculiar, feminine gift. It's as simple as when women get together, what do? They talk. They are wonderfully always able to bring speech. In fact, one of the great studies of the core of Indian civilization, Vak, the concept of the word in selected Hindu tantras, but speech is a goddess. And that goddess is able to make that transform to written language, to readable language that is writable. And one of the deepest mythological themes about this is Eve in the Garden of Eden is the one who eats the apple from the tree of knowledge and shares it with her husband, her companion, Adam. It is the gift of Sophia, wisdom, of Athena, of the quality of the goddess being able to make the brilliance of life-givingness carry over in the transform to a written language, which is a readable language, which then becomes able to bring a new quality into human communication. It is able, for the first time, to emphasize not the mythic tones, but the poetic temperament. But what comes along with the poetic is the rhetoric. And for the masculine quality, for the males, the reading and the writing connotates, in a male way, the rhetorical. That it should make sense. That it should have an order. That it should be able to be planned for, laws, rules, etc. And this is the way we do it and do it right. A poetic is different. A poetic is that quality of wisdom that is able to infuse and suffuse so that the confuse is cleared up. The fog, which the rhetorician seeks to eliminate, not by dealing with the fog, but by obviating the source of the fog. If we get rid of the conditions that make this, we won't have it. So this masculine super control, that this is how we're going to solve this. And the solution following 1945 was a scramble to have atomic bomb energy secure in the American military, with the Russian military rushing pell-mell to get the secrets of the atomic bomb. And by 1949, they had them and had their own atomic bomb. So that immediately there was a broken quality that for 5 years in the late 1940s, the United States as a military power was non-parallel in the world. All of a sudden there were two. But two instantly, because nuclear bombs are not something that you can have. You can't begin and just have it occasionally. It has the capacity to have a nightmare, sudden, instant escalation to oblivion. Nada, nil, zip, as the phrase used to be in one of the tirades in the 60s in San Francisco. There will be nothing left. Any survivors will envy the dead. There'll be monsters of every description, everywhere, of every kind. You can look at the science fiction magazines from the 30s and 40s especially, and into the 50s, and you can see the proliferation. It's not only the bug-eyed monsters, but the fact that they always threaten the feminine. There's always a beautiful girl, an attractive woman, threatened, not just to have something abruptly offensive said, and not just a violent, horrific, shattering rape, but a rape of the entire life, of the entire species. No more love, no more children, no more home, no more birth, no more life. Those bug-eyed monsters are, in fact, the living demons of the atomic bomb, and much stronger than the atomic bomb, the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer refused to work on the atom bomb. So Edward Teller, who was working on the hydrogen bomb, had him undercut, and finally, with Senator Joseph McCarthy, his hometown was Tomahawk, Wisconsin, chop him down in front of the world at Senate hearings, un-American activities, and have his security clearance revoked permanently. The atomic bombs measured their power in tens of thousands of tons of TNT. The first primitive hydrogen bomb was 1,000,000 tons. And finally, they're called megatons. Hydrogen bombs became 50 megaton. The one at Eniwetok Atoll in the Pacific evaporated the entire atoll and everything in the seabed. All the ships that were afloat, they were not just destroyed, they were evaporated. We now live a half a century later, and the capacity is to evaporate the planet. We cannot any longer not learn. It's as simple as that. When we come back from a break, we'll take a look at something which we are doing in a time-honored way to comb through the corrupted, disruptive past into a new past, which at the very same time opens up the future. The future and the new past are chirally, double spirally, like double helix of life. This is how civilization not only continues, but occurs in its reality for the first time. One of the greatest science fiction authors from the Golden Age, Robert Heinlein, in the early 1940s, under the editor of Astounding Science Fiction, wrote a whole outline of future history, and then he would write all the short stories and novels that would fill out the future history. In the future history of Heinlein, 1941, the first mature civilization would be 2075. Let's take a little break.